Your Border Collie is completely still. Not relaxed, still, eyes locked on a shadow moving across the wall, or a child who just broke into a run across the yard, or a ball that stopped rolling 2 seconds ago. They're not blinking, they're barely breathing, and if you say their name, nothing happens. It's like you don't exist. Most people call this intense, some find it unsettling. A lot of BC owners laugh it off and say, that's just how they are. But what if it's not a personality quirk at all? What if your dog isn't choosing to do this? What if their brain has entered a state they genuinely can't walk out of? That's what we're unpacking today on Collie Mind. Not generic dog behavior, but the real neuroscience behind why your Border Collie locks on the way they do and what's actually happening inside their brain when they do it. If you want to understand this breed at a level most people never reach, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly that. By the end of this video, you won't see that stare the same way again. You'll recognize it for what it actually is, one of the most sophisticated focus mechanisms ever built into a domestic dog. To understand the lock-on, you have to start with the predatory motor sequence. Every dog carries a version of it: stalk, eye, chase, grab, kill. It's the ancestral hunting chain wolves use to bring down prey. In most breeds, selective breeding softened or redirected parts of that sequence. In the Border Collie, breeders did something far more specific. They froze it. For over 200 years, working sheepdog breeders selected for dogs that could stalk and lock, hold that fixed, low-bodied stare without completing the sequence. No chase unless directed, no grab, no kill. Just the eye, held under pressure until the handler released them. Generation after generation, the dogs who could sustain that freeze point the longest, the most precisely, with the most control, were the ones who bred on. What that created wasn't just a behavioral tendency. It was a brain that finds the eye state neurologically rewarding on its own. The lock-on doesn't feel like restraint to your Border Collie. It feels like arriving somewhere. Researchers studying working sheepdog cognition have documented this as a distinct neurological state, present in herding breeds, and not replicated in the same form anywhere else in the domestic dog world. So when your BC freezes on a shadow moving across the floor, the predatory sequence doesn't care that there are no sheep. It doesn't require the right context. A bicycle moving past the window, a child sprinting across the yard, sunlight shifting on a wall. Any high-contrast movement can pull the trigger on the same neurological chain that held sheep on a hillside for centuries. This isn't your dog choosing to fixate. It's their brain doing exactly what it was built to do. Now that we know where the eye comes from, we need to look at what's actually running inside your dog's brain the moment they lock on, because this is where it gets more interesting than most people expect. The Border Collie brain doesn't just tolerate the lock-on state, it craves it. When the predatory sequence activates and your dog enters that fixed, focused stillness, dopamine releases. Not as a reward for finishing a task, as a reward for being in the task. The process itself is the payoff. That's what makes this so different from a dog who stares at a squirrel because they want to chase it. Your BC isn't staring because they want what's on the other end. The staring is what they want. This is also why interrupting it is so much harder than most people realize. Calling your dog away from a smell is one thing. The nose is passive, always gathering information, easy to redirect. The lock-on is an active neurological state. The brain has committed resources to it. Pulling your BC out of that state isn't like getting someone's attention across a room. It's closer to yanking someone out of deep concentration mid-task and expecting them to act like nothing happened. The visual piece makes this even more layered. Border Collies were bred to detect micro-movements at distance. A sheep shifting weight on a hillside 200 meters away, the early lean of an animal about to break. That visual sensitivity didn't disappear when the sheep did. Indoors, it means your dog's brain is processing movement cues that you don't even register. A shadow shifting as clouds move outside, the flicker of a screen in a dark room, light bouncing off a glass of water. To you, those things are background noise. To your Border Collie, each one is a potential trigger pulling at the same ancient wire. So the brain is scanning constantly, finding stimuli constantly, and when something crosses the threshold, when the movement is high contrast enough, fast enough, unpredictable enough, the loop opens. Dopamine drops, the eye locks on, and the brain is now running a process that evolution spent 2 centuries making feel more important than almost anything else in that dog's environment. That includes your voice. When you call their name and nothing happens, your BC isn't making a choice to ignore you. Their brain has genuinely deprioritized everything that isn't the target. This isn't defiance. It's the neurological equivalent of being so deep in a task that someone has to physically tap you on the shoulder to break through. Except for your dog, the drive behind that task was engineered to be almost impossible to override. Here's where it gets harder. When the lock-on is interrupted repeatedly, called off before the loop closes, or corrected every time it opens, the BC doesn't learn to stop wanting it. They accumulate stress. The reward pathway activates, then gets blocked, and cortisol builds in place of the resolution the brain was expecting. Over time, that pattern doesn't reduce the behavior. It pushes it towards substitutes: shadow chasing, light fixation, staring at nothing on a wall. The brain keeps looking for a loop it can finally close. The difference between a border collie who locks on and then disengages cleanly and one who spirals deeper every time often comes down to one thing: whether the loop has somewhere to go. Drive and fixation look similar from the outside. Both involve an intense, locked focus that other dogs don't show, but they're running on completely different fuel. Drive is the brain entering the lock-on state with a direction, a task that can move forward, a handler providing shape to the sequence, a job that has a beginning and an end. Fixation is what happens when the same neurological loop activates with nowhere to land. The brain opens the sequence, finds no resolution, and keeps cycling. Not because your dog is broken, but because the mechanism that was supposed to close the loop is missing. That mechanism, on a working farm, was the handler. In the herding sequence, the shepherd's cue was always the natural endpoint. It gave the predatory chain its structure. The dog could stalk, hold the eye, move the sheep, and then receive the signal that the job was done. The loop closed. The brain could settle. In a home with no structured outlet and no handler-directed task, the loop doesn't close. It just keeps running, lower and lower to the ground, looking for a sheep that isn't there. This is also where trigger stacking becomes a real problem for border collies specifically. A dog who locks onto a shadow in the morning, then onto a child running past the window at noon, then onto a flickering ceiling light in the afternoon, isn't having 3 separate moments of intensity. Each one of those activations opens the same dopamine loop without resolution. By the 3rd trigger, the threshold for setting it off is significantly lower. What took a sprinting child at 9 a.m. only takes a leaf moving at 4 p.m. The brain isn't calming down between triggers, it's priming. The attachment layer runs through all of this. A border collie with a strong working bond with their handler has one thing that can genuinely interrupt the loop: a cue from the person their brain trusts most. The handler's voice was always the natural close of the herding sequence. Without that bond, without that deep, specific connection, there's no clean off switch. The loop runs until it exhausts itself or finds a substitute. So if your BC's lock-on has started to feel less like sharp focus and more like something they can't exit, that's not a training failure on your part. It's a signal. The loop is running. It needs a structured place to close. The genetics, the dopamine loop, the incomplete predatory sequence, the attachment bond. In your border collie, these aren't 4 separate problems. They're one system. And that system has been running since the first sheepdog held a flock on a hillside without being told twice. That dog locked onto a shadow on your wall isn't broken. They're not being stubborn. They're running the most sophisticated focus mechanism in the domestic dog world, in a room that gives it nothing useful to focus on. The goal was never to eliminate the lock-on. It's to give it somewhere to land, structured tasks, handler-directed cues, outlets that let the sequence actually close. That's what Collie Mind is here for. Not generic fixes, but the real psychology behind what your border collie is actually doing. Share this with every BC owner you know, because most of them are watching this behavior every day and have no idea what they're actually seeing.